In early April, tens of thousands of Turkish warriors descended upon Constantinople. They were motivated by Sultan Mehmet, who promised them glory and honor in basically fulfilling the prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad in taking the city of Constantinople. Some people would list it as 160,000, and some would list it as 400. They'd be made up by, of course, Bashi Bozuks, irregular soldiers who basically were not paid. They were armed, so they were given weapons, and sometimes they brought their own, like the case of scimitars, slings, arrows, javelins, what have you. Maybe a few arbusks here and there. But the Bashi Bozuks were motivated by plunder. They would, as soon as the city was taken, they would have days relegated to just plundering the city. And then, of course, we have Karaca Pasha over here, who was leading the European troops here. Now, the European troops were all sorts of different backgrounds. We have Germans, we have Hungarians, we have Slavs, we have other Greeks that were attacking this Greek city over here. And their armament is very different. Some of them were seen to be dressed in a very French style. We have Ishak Pasha over here, who is leading the Anatolian troops. So these are troops coming all the way from Anatolia. Mehmet II, however, will bring his own regiment, that being, of course, the Janissaries. The Janissaries started off as Christian slaves that would be taken in battle, and instead they evolved to become basically the sons of Christian subjects of the Ottoman Empire. They would be filtered in through a system known as dervishum. Christian subjects, you convert them to Islam, train them in whatever ways, right? Some of them would be filtered in and been brought into the administrative of the Ottoman Empire. Really cool white hat on top, and they are usually musketmen, but they are armed with like a variety of different melee weapons as well. Alongside the Janissaries, of course, would be cannons. The story of Orban's cannon is very funny. Basically, he goes up to the Byzantines, says, hey, I got a big ass cannon, you want to buy it? They are broke as shit, so they don't buy it and they can't afford it. So he goes up to the Ottomans and he says, hey, I could blow up the walls of Babylon itself. Or maybe Baghdad, I don't remember. And then the Mehmet basically wants to see a demonstration of this. And he does so in a, I believe, a sector in the city that he was in currently, like I think Adrianople or Idrin. But essentially, he sees this cannon fire. It blows up a huge chunk of the earth, and he's like, all right, bro, you got it. So they basically build a humongous assortment of cannons, and also Orban is specifically tasked to create a cannon that is double the size of the cannon that was used in the demonstration. This monster is hauled together through with oxen and many different like laborers, and eventually brought to the front lines. It is humongous. It is the Great Bombard right here, the Orban's cannon, the Dardanelles cannon, or Dardanelles gun, many smaller cannons that accompany this humongous force. As we say, 160k to 400k. Your sources will vary. But maybe you want to experience defending your great capital or conquering one. Fortunately for you, Heroes of History can provide that story. Build and evolve your civilization through combat, research, and strategy. Create powerful battle lines with rare heroes famous throughout history, such as Einstein, Cleopatra, and Hercules. Fight your friends or work together to maintain your empires and enjoy casual sessions for long-term progression, being able to play the game anytime on your mobile device or browser. Events are fairly common with updates that will have you battling new peoples and heroes. A new seasonal winter event will be available for players from December 11th to 26th. If you're interested, check out my promo code MasterRawfulous that gives you a boost to win your first level 5-star hero and get some goodies to help you progress through the game. Keep in mind, this promo code is only for new users in the first 5 days of playing. So if you think you could beat my army, prove it by summoning your first hero now with the download link in my bio, QR code on screen, and the pinned comment. Along with, of course, this massive land army, we have an Ottoman fleet. This Ottoman fleet is made up of simple rowing vessels, galleys. We've got ourselves like triremes, for example. There are many different rowing ships, as well as ships that don't rely on solely rowers altogether, like just sails, basically. So you have a variety of different like vessels here at their disposal. Now, Constantinople was already having issues and being blockaded. That being, of course, because Sultan Mehmet created a massive castle, actually, called the Throat Cutter. This castle blocked off the Bosphorus. It was built on the European side of the Bosphorus, the Byzantine side. And so because of it, it was able to block off this entire chunk of area here. In fact, and it would actually be able to destroy a Venetian vessel that was trying to move and trade into Constantinople. Now up top we have Zagan Pasha. He's a European convert, so to speak, that holds a bunch of troops here. A lot of them actually are going to be sappers that the Ottomans will use in some of their later periods of the siege, actually, to try and mine underneath the city. And if anybody is confused, the word Pasha can mean a general, a commander, multiple different hats, so to speak. It's a word that could mean like a person who is governing a territory and someone who's just leading an army, so to speak. For example, Karaca Pasha and Ishak Pasha are both pashas, but they also bey-ber-leys. Beyler Bey basically is someone who is a bey of beys. And bey just means like an equivalent to a European duke or governor or something like that. They own a territory. They are expected to administer it, to tax it, and to collect troops for it. So that's what, for the case for Ishak Pasha, Karaca Pasha, they are both bey-ber-leys. But Zagan Pasha is not a bey-ber-ley, but he is a pasha. Okay, so that's just to clear everything up, so to speak. The Ottoman fleet is led by two admirals. That would be Balto Ugulu and Hamza Bey. They're both commanders of the Ottoman fleet, and we'll get more into them later on. Someone who isn't listed here is Halil Pasha. Halil Pasha is the Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire. He was the Grand Vizier prior to Sultan Mehmed II, that being under his father, Sultan Murad. And then, of course, he got Sultan Mehmed II usurped. Sultan Mehmed is pretty pissed off, actually. In fact, it was pretty recently in 1446 when Sultan Mehmed was usurped. And that was the latest event that caused it. And he only got back the reign of Sultan basically when his father died in 1449. Sorry, I just realized the camera was like completely cutting off this area, so I hope you guys were able to see some of this. But essentially, that's kind of like the Ottoman side, so to speak. We'll explain like everything as it happens, especially like what's going on over here afterwards. Now, let's get on to, of course, the Byzantine Empire here. Something to note about the Byzantine Empire is that the Grand Vizier apparently did not want to invade the Byzantine Empire and take the city of Constantinople. So this is something that Halil Pasha and Sultan Mehmed will basically argue over. So let's get on to the Byzantines. So first and foremost, we have the Byzantine Empire led by, of course, Constantine Palaiologos, or Constantine the 11th. He basically is part of the Palaiologos dynasty. They are the last dynasty of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire has had multiple different dynasties that have owned the empire, and it's really not looking good for Palaiologos. He really is basically throughout most of his reign trying to repair a lot of the damages that have been incurred on the city over the years. Like, there are many different areas that are in repair, right? There are like really like places that need to be fixed up, like churches, like many different like districts have been abandoned. So there's huge chunks of the Byzantine Empire here that used to, right? There are huge chunks of Constantinople. They used to have districts that used to be filled with people. They used to have quarters that were like subdivided and stuff like that, like you can see right here with these different streets. But now there's such a reduction in the population that these areas are filled with fields, essentially, filled with like farmland and stuff. Money issues are a problem for the Byzantine Empire. And as you can see from their empire right over here, which just basically encompasses some of Thrace and Moria over here, and that's really about it. So there's really only an empire in name going on, so to speak, right now. But it's still chugging along. You still have like very beautifully anointed and decorated churches within the city. There are very wealthy districts like the Venetian district over here, where the Venetians have been doing massive trade with Constantinople. There's a huge district, and a lot of the defenders of Constantinople will be Venetians that'll be coming in to aid it, either from the Venetian quarter or from Venetians out of the city and coming in from Venetian colonies. There'll also be Genoese over here. The Genoese will actually have a city right over here called Pera that is across the Golden Horn that basically is its own independent colony, so to speak. And that colony, alongside one in Theodora over here in the Black Sea, these two colonies essentially annihilate a lot of the trade that was previously coming into Constantinople. So if you want to blame a lot of the money troubles, it will be because of these European influences. However, these Europeans, that being the Genoese and the Venetians, have been keeping Constantinople safe. In fact, Pera, right, basically alongside Constantinople, owns both halves of what we know as the Great Chain over here, or the boom of the Golden Horn over here. This chain was basically attached from one end of Constantinople with a series of platforms, of wooden platforms, was attaching itself all the way to Pera over here. And this locks down the Golden Horn and stops any incoming fleet from sailing up the Golden Horn and laying siege to Constantinople. This happened during the Fourth Crusade, where Latin crusaders sacked Constantinople and established the Latin Empire. Alongside this great chain, of course, we have the Theodosian walls. The Theodosian walls are a triple wall system, technically, where you have, of course, you have a moat over here, and then you have a walled structure outside the moat. You have a landing over here, this like ground here called the Paratychion. This Paratychion was isolated from the outer wall, okay? The outer wall essentially is lined with multiple towers and stuff like that, that archers could shoot down from, that muskets can fire down from, and basically, well, arabesques actually, not muskets. Sorry about that to anybody who was typing. But essentially, these outer wall areas would be perfect for the defenders to lob projectiles down to the attackers that move across the moat. Sometimes the moat had water, sometimes the moat was just a giant ditch. It varies. It was huge, right? The moat is basically going from this humongous stretch of wall over here. You can see right over here, right? This blue line basically signifies the humongous stretch of moat that was here. And then, of course, we have one of the walls behind it, and then the outer wall as well. And the inner wall had an even bigger tower behind it as well. And then defenders can, of course, throw their javelins, shoot their guns, fire their arrows, all that stuff, right? So that was basically the triple wall system of the Theodosian walls, so to speak. It was very formidable, very impervious to damage, and unfortunately for the Ottomans, it more or less was pretty well maintained. Of course, aside from the churches of Constantinople and some quarters, the walls themselves were very well maintained. So ultimately, these are still in prime condition. There are a few weak areas, of course. We have the Mesothikion over here. This is essentially an area of the wall that is on the, that's basically inside a valley, essentially, right? So I'll draw it out right here. You essentially have this big ass hill, and then it moves into the valley, and that is where the wall is at, basically, right over there. So essentially, if you were, let's say, a big old cannon right here, ignore every, right? You could fire down cannonballs at the wall over here, right? Because you have the high ground. The wall is on the lower ground of the valley. So essentially, it doesn't really look good. That's one weak area. Another weak area is, of course, the this area over here, this quarter that's like jutting out over here, right? This area is a newer addition to Constantinople, and the moat does not carry around this area. And because it juts out over here, it's very, very weak, right? In comparison to all this other area here that's just basically straight wall, right? So it can be attacked at multiple different angles, especially with different artillery units. So this area was more or less focused on and fortified by the Byzantines because of its weaknesses. So those are the two big weaknesses of the Theodosian walls, especially because the Mesothikion has the Lycus River that goes underneath it. So now the Byzantine Empire had a lot of problems. As you can see, by 12th century, they were at 1 million population, but then the Latin Empire comes in at about 1204 and really fucks everything up. And while the Byzantines are able to get back their empire once again, once the Latin Empire falls apart, and they are able to stroll into Constantinople, Constantinople is a fucking mess. It's completely destroyed in many different ways. And it takes a lot of time to repair it, essentially. By this time, of course, the Turks have kicked out the Byzantines out of Anatolia and even have taken over the Asian side of Constantinople, taking away many of the suburbs. And the Byzantines were not in a good situation either at this point too, because the Serbians, the Bulgarians, also took advantage of the situation, taking over huge chunks of the Balkan and European areas over here. The Ottomans were one of the more like successful Turkic beyliks that basically lived in Anatolia. These Ottomans were able to conquer most of their neighbors in Anatolia and then also cross over to the Balkan area and take over huge swaths of the Balkans, taking them from the Serbians and the Bulgarians. So now the Ottomans completely surrounded the Byzantines on all sides, and the Byzantines now have forever lost those European provinces that they had prior to the Serbians and the Bulgarians invading them, right? Then, of course, we have the Black Death. So 1/3 of the population dies in Constantinople anyway. And because traditional allies such as the Armenians and the Russians are a little bit too far away or too weak, the Byzantines have to rely on Western help. Now, this doesn't really work out, of course, because the Westerners get their asses kicked. So we have, of course, the Battle of Nicopolis, where there is a humongous coalition of Christian armies that are attacking the Ottomans. The Ottomans fucking win. And then we also have the Crusade of Varna. Varna is more closely related to our timeline, happening in about 1444. And yeah, the Christians led by the Hungarians are utterly annihilated, leading to a peace treaty with the Hungarians. So now the Ottomans have a peace treaty with Hungary as well. So that prevents any Hungarian aid from coming in. There were multiple times that Constantinople was almost conquered by the Turks altogether. In 1402, we have an invasion attempt by the Turks against Constantinople. They are stopped by, of course, Tamerlane, who invades, and that leads to the Battle of Ankara, which then leads to an Ottoman loss, which leads to the Ottoman Civil War. So that prevented the Byzantines from getting killed by the Ottomans. But then afterwards, in 1422, we have the Ottomans once again attacking Constantinople. This time led by, of course, Sultan Murad, who was Sultan Mehmet's father. The Byzantine Empire had also, prior to 1402 and 1422, tried to stop the Ottomans from conquering all of the European territories here, but they had been completely destroyed by the Ottomans, leading to, of course, the Byzantines foregoing any type of offensive contact against the Ottomans whatsoever. So the Byzantines, as you've heard, are basically going through European allies. One of them that was very interesting was the Papal States, where they tried to sign a union with Rome, combining the Eastern Orthodox Church with the Western Catholic Church. It would result in the Pope sending in many different aids to Constantinople, trying to send in weapons, trying to send in troops, trying to send in ships. But as you'll see from the whole timeline over here, it gets really messy. Now, the union with Rome was started by Constantine's predecessor, John Palaeologos, but unfortunately, because of the brokenness of John, as well as just all the losses that had occurred because of European intervention, and because also that he was childless, he basically was schemed on by his brothers at the royal court. Now, fortunately, his favorite successor, Constantine, would take over. So ultimately, succession prevented a civil war from happening, but ultimately, the situation is very dire. The Turks had a cordial relationship with the Byzantines. Sultan Mehmed promised Constantinople would not be attacked. However, that would stop, when Constantine would remind Sultan Mehmed that Constantinople was housing Prince Orkhan. And he asked if, one, you could double the allowance that you were giving to house Prince Orkhan and keep up his upkeep, but also that if you didn't, we would release him. So Constantine basically was threatening Mehmed at a time when his janissaries over here were asking for higher wages. So this really annoyed the shit out of Mehmed. And so afterwards, even though he had a very stone-faced, I'll look into it, he crossed over to the European side of Constantinople and built the throat cutter. And you know, that's how we know how that went down. Now, if you've ever played an Age of Empires game, you're gonna try and bribe your friend before he like invades your city and shit like that. You send him gifts and stuff. Mehmed was nice about it the first couple of times. He was like, yo guys, shoo. And then Constantine kept asking him, and he was like, yo, are you going to attack the city, yes or no? And Mehmed just basically killed and impaled those ambassadors afterwards. So, no, he decapitated them. Sorry, my bad. He decapitated those ambassadors afterwards. So he meant business. Killing the ambassadors, war was officially declared. Now, like I said, Genoa and Venice both had various trade relations with the Ottomans and the Byzantines. So they definitely didn't want to ruin their relations with the Byzantines. I mean, their relations with the Ottomans, but they also didn't want to ruin it with the Byzantines either, especially since the Venetians had their own quarter in the city of Constantinople. So they were a lot more responsible for Constantinople. Aside from Frederick II of Germany sending a stern warning, most people didn't do anything, right? Genoa and Venice told their ships not to do shit, okay? Pera, this city over here, would basically not do shit. It was told by the Ottomans not to do shit, so the Genoese colony here was left alone for the most part. Naples would follow up with that as well. However, the Byzantines, prior to all this madness going on, had actually sent out ships to request aid. Some of them went to Naples, okay? They went to Naples, they asked for aid, and Naples will start gathering up resources and food stuff to send over to Constantinople. That'll be important later on. The biggest thing that came from the Byzantines asking for aid from multiple different Western people was that Cardinal Isidro over here would send over 200 men and start to push the idea of a union with Rome. Now, despite the arrival of Cardinal Isidro and the massive need for materials and resources, a lot of people were against the union with Rome. One, they were against it on religious grounds. Two, they hated Latins. They hated them because of the Latin Empire. So because of that, they were like, whoa, I do not want to be associated with these people. And you know what? Fair enough. Apparently they didn't shower, so I don't want to fucking deal with them either. And this type of infighting actually was occurring on the Ottoman side as well. You see, the Ottomans, as I said beforehand, were made up by different pashas, right? Again, Halil Pasha was against the Siege of Constantinople. So he argued the siege will fail, we're going to be stuck here, it's not going to work out. And he was telling Mehmed II not to invade. Halil says no, but Zagran Pasha or Zaganos Pasha says yes, attack it. Mehmed, he's kind of like walking around the city thinking about it and stuff, and then finally goes, we're going to attack. Makes a famous speech in January at the end of January 1453. When aid finally came to the city was already besieged for a fortnight. So because and the Serbians are sending troops to help the Ottomans. So okay, this is cool, right? So we have many different Venetian colonies and the Venetian quarter people coming to help. We have actually troops from Catalan. These are Catalan colony troops that were in Constantinople that are coming to help. We have Cretans and Aragonese ship coming in. We have one from Akatin as well, this like city-state or something. Even Prince Orkan and the Turks under him would help in defending the city because like where else were they gonna go? Like dead ass. These guys are gonna be the first ones killed by the Ottomans actually, as soon as they enter the city. So because of that, Prince Orkan defends the city to his breath, basically. So it's funny, Turks are fighting Turks because one Turkic group is basically defending, not one Turkic group, one group of Turks is defending Constantinople against another. Because of all this aid, the troop numbers of the Byzantines balloon to 8,000 troops. I think about 3,000 of those are foreign troops and 4,000 are Greek, and 1,000 are like whatever. So because of this, the emperor is like, don't make this public knowledge because, yeah, if I was up against 160K and I had 8K, I would shit my pants as well. A vast majority of help would be done by the civilian population. The fighting men would be charged with arming themselves and fighting it out. And the men and women who weren't fighting, they would be repairing the walls and repairing damages that were caused and stuff like that overnight, essentially. The only people that weren't helping were the old fucks and the children. They would be hiding in the cathedrals and shit. Meanwhile, more aid would come to Constantinople as Venice and the Papal States of the Pope were basically kind of jockeying for how they're going to help Constantinople. You see, the Pope needed Venetian ships to transport his aid to Constantinople. Venice needed the Pope to pay for fucking ships that they already gave the Pope prior to at a previous engagement. So they had to do some finagling and stuff, and finally they agreed to send 400 troops and some ships, you know, to aid Constantinople. Fleet over here would make their way to the Sea of Marmara at the end of March. They were either like prisoners, slaves, or actually volunteers, because you get a lot of good pay by being a rower on an Ottoman galley. April 2nd is when the first detachment of Sultan Mehmed's forces would arrive to Constantinople. Now, the Byzantines would do a brief sortie. They would do a brief sortie and attack outside the walls and attack these incoming troops. But because of the continuous trickling in of more Ottoman forces, they would be eventually forced back into Constantinople. They will basically destroy all the bridges that were connecting to Constantinople and also closing all the gates. So now Constantinople was locked down. The chain that stretches from Pera all the way to Constantinople was set up. So now there was no way to enter the Golden Horn, which is funny because, like I said, Pera was supposed to be neutral, right? And here they were setting up the chain that is on their side of the Golden Horn. By April 5th, the entire Turkish army is at Constantinople. Now with all the pieces in place, we got a zoomed in view of the map so far. Let me know if this is, by the way, a good size for the map. I was kind of like deciding whether or not I wanted to be like 4 images here, or maybe if I wanted to be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 images here. So maybe it could be like a little bit bigger. But then like I thought like, oh, if I increase the size here, that I cut off all this other shit that could be around it and whiteboard space. So do let me know. But anyway, so right now we've got Constantinople. So we've got the Theodosian walls here. They go all the way from here to here, basically. Now, at the Mystikon, right, the weakest point of the Theodosian walls, Emperor Constantine XI will be there defending the territory here because this is the weakest point. This is where the Turks are going to strike the most. Joining him, defending the Mystikon, will be, of course, Giovanni Giustini. Right over here, Giovanni Giustini, or Giustiniani, or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, he is a Genoese nobleman and quite a well-known mercenary, actually. And he's very skilled at defensive tactics and siege warfare. So because of this, because of his intervention here, a lot of extremely smart and intelligent choices are being made. First and foremost, the Emperor and Giustini, or Giovanni, I'll just call him Giovanni, they will defend the outer wall exclusively. This is because of the fact that the inner wall, there's not enough troops to man both the inner and outer wall. And once they get to the inner wall, it's pretty much toast because the Ottomans are able to use the full brunt of their forces. So we've got to concentrate on the outer wall, specifically on the Mesothikon. He was originally sent to the Blocherna right over here. The area in question will now be defended by Girolamo Minotto as well as the Bucciardi brothers. They are a group of 3 bros that are coming in, bringing in their own arms and equipment to go and deal with Constantinople. So again, another volunteer group. Behind them is Lucas Notaras, who's basically a Greek statesman, so to speak, actually. He's like part of Team Constantinople. Now below this group of people is Theophilios Palaiologos. He is the cousin of Emperor Constantine, and he'll be defending the Gate of Pegae, which is basically the Gate of the Spring. Essentially, it's right next to a monastery near a spring. Now, below Palaiologos over here is the brother of the emperor, that being Dimitrios Palaiologos Kantakosinios. Now, he is the brother of the emperor and also a chief minister, just like Lucas Notaras. So they are known as Messazones, basically. We've got some like side characters here. We got Gabriel Trevisino, who is basically right here. He is a Venetian commander. Another Venetian commander is Alfonso Diedo. He leads the fleet of the besieged over here, the Christian fleet. Yeah, Cardinal Isidro and his 200 men right over there. Theodoro Caristo is also a Venetian. They are Venetian volunteers defending this area. And then we have Filippo Contranini, who basically is a defender from the gates of Pegay, this like spring over here, all the way to the Golden Gate down here. So he's covering this big section. We have Jacob Contranin, Nicolas Goudelis. He basically is a Byzantine nobleman who has the Byzantine reserves right over here. So that covers characters. Let's go through a quick geography of the map in question. We've covered a lot of it, but we also have the Kerka Porta over here, which is a small gate in the walls of Constantinople. They use this often to sally out troops in and out of the battle in question. So they can sally out, attack the army here, and then go back in behind the walls. Like I said, we also have a black Chernay, which is basically a district wall. It's really fortified. It kind of protrudes out. It is apparently 18 feet wide, essentially. So it is a long series of fortifications. So now you can see how these towers were set up. This is a tower setup of the Theodosian walls in 447 AD. So please do keep in mind it's a little outdated, but the way the Theodosian walls look is pretty similar, honestly. You see here an area where the defenders could shoot out of through windows, through like holes and shit like that, and fire out siege weapons or arabesques or muskets, not muskets, or crossbows or bows or shit like that. Up top, the defenders can do the same thing, but on this rooftop area. The big thing though is that there's no way to get to this upper area aside from the walkway, actually. This whole tower is completely isolated, right? And so because of this, combined with, of course, this Theodosian wall setup over here, you can see how the attackers are going to try and go through the moats. They're going to stop right over here at the Parathicion. They have to climb over the outer walls, and then they have to go through to the city and to the towers here, and they can't do so because there's no entrance to the tower, right? In order to get into the tower, you have to get on the walkway, and the walkway is located inside the city. So you have to go through the gates that are locked. Now, of the walls, the strongest point was the Golden Gate. The Golden Gate was the strongest point because it had a fortification system behind the gate itself. And because of this fortification system, oftentimes during Byzantine coups, the Byzantine Emperor would hide in the Golden Gate. Once they built the towers and actually extended the wall 350 meters to the seawall over here, the Turks actually threatened the Byzantines to burn down the Golden Gate and that fortification system. Because if they didn't do so, the Turks would have invaded the city of Constantinople. The defense has a few weapons at their disposal. They've got crossbows, javelins, all that shit. And then of course they have culverins, which are a type of like small slender cannon basically, and then a few mangonels to throw stone projectiles. But there aren't a lot of cannons along the wall system. That is because it is discovered that the usage of these cannons actually can harm the land fortifications. So more or less they are very rarely used basically, actually. And more or less, a lot of cannons are kind of kept in reserve. And there's also a shortage of saltpeter, so they couldn't even match the Ottomans in bombardment anyway. Now the Ottomans would make one last appeal to the Byzantines. Hey, guys, surrender right now. I'll let all of you guys go, blah, blah, blah. No problem whatsoever. They say fuck no, and the Ottomans begin their bombardment of the walls, and it is a long bombardment. It does significant damage to the walls, especially the cannons of Urban, especially the giant bombard basically. Hold on, let me move my camera. This cannon was often extremely hot. It could fire maybe 7 times or some shit like that, and then afterwards it had to cool down for hours and hours. They had to soak this thing in Diddy oil and stuff just to make sure that it did not blow up on them, because as you can see, this thing is huge. It needs teams of people to work on it and stuff. It is a large cast cannon basically, but when it did fire and when it did hit, it was terrifying. Now, it would take a humongous amount of damage, but the defenders would be able to quickly repair things as they got damaged, especially the civilians here. So without the men and women here of the city repairing the walls at all times, Like, they would have actually done some damage to them. But more or less, the cannons, actually, the Theodosian walls were doing pretty well holding their own against the cannons. The outer wall was getting some chipping here and there, but the inner wall and all that shit, pretty good. Now, Mehmed will basically create a system of trenches along the wall system here to hide his men. That way, when they're charging out and stuff, they're ready to go and stuff like that, and they can hide behind the trenches. And alongside bringing in these men to build trenches, they'll also bring in more guns and also sappers, which will start to dig underneath the tunnels of Constantinople to try and create a tunnel system to go behind the city walls. 6 weeks. They do not stop bombarding the castle walls, not the castle walls, the walls of Constantinople. They don't stop bombarding this shit. And again, it's repaired as soon as possible. A lot of the cannons, there's cannons firing on all directions of Constantinople. A lot of them focus on Mesothecion because, again, it is the weakest point in the Lycus Valley. And because of that, the outer wall is mostly gone of the Lycus Valley. The repairs are difficult. But because of that, around nightfall, when the outer wall is basically gone, a stockade is created. So a wooden stockade basically covers the outer wall, preventing any like Turkish advance, basically. We have the ships of the Ottoman fleet that make an attempt to attack the chain over here. So they're going to move over here and attack the chain. And it's not going to work out, actually. They're going to try, they're going to bolster, they're going to taunt the ships and stuff. But it's very clear that there is a size difference between the fleet of the besieged and the Ottoman fleet. See, the Ottoman fleet are like triremes, biremes, all these like very like low ships, right? I don't know how to describe it. They're not very tall. They're very like low, right? So like you can just kind of like get on board them. There's like a cannon there or some shit. Your lads are there and you're like rowing and stuff. So that's how that's going, right? These ships are very low. The Venetian ships are tall. Right? They have towers, basically, right? Even the merchant ships have towers. So defenders can just throw shit down below them and stuff like that, fire arrows and guns and all that stuff, and they can't do shit. Like, the Ottomans can't do shit against the defenders. Keep in mind, too, that the Venetians are pretty good sailors. The Ottoman fleet is made up of volunteers, slaves, and all that shit. So these guys are actually experts at sea warfare. So while the fleet of the besieged are near the walls of Pera, on April 18th, Mehmet orders an assault of the Mesothecion. Now, the assault is a failure. It's an absolute failure. Not a single Christian loss is actually occurred from Constantinople. So this is a great success from them. While the bombardment is still ongoing, those ships that I talked about that are sailing away to give foodstuffs to the Byzantines, they finally arrive. They're spotted at the Sea of Marmara on April 20th, basically, and they manage to fend off a Turkish force led by Baltoglu, basically attacking these Venetian merchant vessels. There's only 4 of them. There's like 50 or so Turkish vessels, and the Venetians are able to hold their own against them, basically. As you can see, the Genoese ship, much like the Venetian ship, is larger. It's taller and is able to use its big tower, kind of like a battlement of a wall system. So when all 4 of these merchant ships from Genoa combine into one, they basically form a castle, essentially, and are able to act like a castle, fending off horde after horde after horde of Turkish ships, basically, that are not protected, that are occupied by sailors and volunteers and people who are not seamen, which these Genoese and Venetians are. So that is how they're able to destroy, well, not destroy, but fend off many more Turks than the Genoese. So when the Turkish ships are just about to beat the Genoese vessels because they're exhausted, the troops have been fighting constantly the entire time and stuff, they're able to get a gust of wind, right? Because the wind died, which allowed the Turkish vessels to catch up to these Genoese fleets, right? Once the wind picks up, they're able to shoot past these Turkish vessels and go through the chain once again back to the fleet of the besieged. Most of the time during this fighting, mind you, the Turks in question were being yelled at by Sultan Mehmed, who rode his horse all the way across here and right over here, yelling at Baltogulu for getting his ass kicked by these Venetian ships. Baltogulu is like, please, sir, I lost my fucking eye. Like, I can only do so much. And unfortunately, it's true. He can only do so much. Like, the Venetian ships are just better. But Baltogulu is stripped of his rank, and because of that, Hamza Bey now becomes the admiral in question. We don't hear from Baltogulu ever again. He dies poor. This delivery of ships actually was really well needed. It gave them manpower, food, and ammo for the defenders. So this was like a really good victory. And everybody celebrated, and the Turks, again, took another L. Now, on April 20th and 21st, bombardment's continuing. The outer wall is gone, basically, but repairs are just made too fast. They're just able to create stockades way too fast. And a great tower of the Mesothikon is completely annihilated. So that tower I showed off earlier, one of them is just gone, just from bombardment alone. But while that is happening, the Sultan actually goes to Diplokinion, right over here, the double columns. Over here, he starts to think of a way to bypass the advantage the chain provides and enter the Golden Horn. Now, through the efforts of Italian engineers, he's able to take his ships and move them overland to the Golden Horn. You see right here a picture of the vessels in question being pulled over by teams of men. They have logs underneath the ships that allow them to move them overland, and the ships are just, you know, having the oars in the air, just like rowing over land, basically, you know? And they move these ships all the way across to the Golden Horn. Which leads us here, you can see that the ships start from over here at the Bosphorus and then move all the way to the Golden Horn. So now the Ottoman ships are at the Golden Horn. There's about 70 of them after April 23rd, and there's basically ships here at the Golden Horn and ships outside the chain as well. So now the fleet of the besieged basically are trapped on both sides, and the Golden Horn is now not secured for the defenders. Now, there was an attempt by the fleet of the besieged to attack these Turkish vessels, but there was just constant delays. The Genoese wanted a piece of the action, you know, so they wanted to get prepared, and these people wanted to get prepared, and just caused delays after delays after delays. Eventually, someone from Pera managed to tip off the Ottomans, and the Ottomans were essentially ready for the Byzantine attack. And when the Byzantine attack came, the Ottomans sprung the trap on them. They were well prepared for the assault, so they were able to attack the Byzantine vessels head on and sunk one of their ships, and because of that, the Byzantines had to back off. Now, the movement of the Golden Horn allowed for multiple things to happen. First, like I said, the dividing of the fleet of the besieged, but also it allowed for the blockading of Pera, which was somewhat aiding Constantinople at the time. It also allowed for the Turks to establish a pontoon bridge over here connecting this main army to Zagran Pasha. So it allowed for ease of communications between both of these sides over here. This also caused many to suspect the Genoese. You see, because of their, you know, non-neutral status and stuff like that, and Pera not helping, a lot of people accuse the Genoese of just aiding the Ottomans. And this would become more and more of a problem for the Italian defenders as time goes on. Yeah, I don't know how. I forgot I didn't have my lighting on. So where am I at? So the bombardment of the city continues, and yeah, it's just like never ending, you know? The sound that the defenders had, it was at first very deafening and very scary, especially for the civilian population. But after a while, you just get used to the constant cacophony of sounds, of explosions, of all this stuff coming at the city, basically. There was 1 week of no hand-to-hand fighting, just constant bombardment. Food was running low, supplies was running low. The emperor had to create a little charity system to make sure everybody was fed properly. Greek soldiers had to leave their post so that they could feed their families, basically, in the city itself. Venetians didn't have to deal with this issue, and same with the Genoese, who had like family in Pera. So it becomes a very dicey situation for the Greeks at all. Like, they are like torn between being supportive of their families and the emperor. Now, because of the emperor's charity, these issues would kind of be mitigated, but again, there was no help coming from any outside power. Some people did think it was still coming, right? The Byzantines thought it was still coming, and the Turks, they believed it was coming, actually. And there was a threat looming in the back of their heads over their Hungarian king coming to invade and attack them. The Byzantines knew there was a possibility for a Venetian fleet to come. The Byzantines would take one of the ships from the fleet of the besieged, try and find this fleet basically. They're looking in the Aegean, they're looking in the Eastern Mediterranean, they're going to try and find the Venetian fleet. At May 5th, we hear of cannons that were brought over from the pontoon bridge on Zagan Pasha's side and are now firing over the city of Pera. May 6th, Urban's cannon would come back actually. It was like kind of damaged after constant usage. It needed a little bit of a cool down period, but now it's back ready for action and bombardment began anew and began with much more ferocity. It was much more powerful than what was previously. I don't know if it was the heaviest bombardment. I don't know if I wrote that down here, but it was definitely renewed bombardment for sure. This is because on May 7th, we have the assault again on the Mesophykion. Sailors from the fleet of the besieged would go and actually help out at the Block Hernay, actually, that was, defended by the Venetians under Girolamo Minuto, and there would be attack from the European army of the Turks all the way onto it. However, this attack would fail as well. On the 14th, Sultan Murad will try and dick around with the location of his cannon and move them to, different areas here or there, whatever. But eventually we'll just sit them all at the Valley of Lycus and make Make them sit down at the Valley of Lycus and just hit this wall over here in particular, as again, it is the weakest area. So all the cannons would they'll still be firing across this entire area, firing at all sides of the city of Constantinople, but more or less, the cannons would be focused on the Lycus Valley. We have an attack of the Christian ships by the Ottoman fleet again on the 16th and 17th, and then they back off before they take any serious losses. And that's basically again, they attack on the 21st, and then after that, they don't attack anymore. So this is like the final time that the Turkish fleet is seen as an actual threat to the fleet of the besieged. It's at this point, because the bombardment isn't working, because the ships aren't working, that mining operations start to really pick up on the 21st, actually. So you see mining operations across the wall, basically. Ishak Basha, as well, is also constantly attacking the Golden Gate. May 18, we have a siege tower that is built, and that siege tower is tasked with basically helping the Turkish soldiers fill up the moat or the fosse in front of the outer wall, essentially. And so because of that, now the Turks are hiding underneath the siege tower. They're chilling out, they think things are fine, and the siege tower protects them against culverin fire, from arrow fire, from attacks. But under the cover of darkness, the Byzantines are able to sortie out, attack the tower, light it up with Greek fire, and blow that shit up. By May 23rd, all the mining operations were discovered by the Greeks. The attackers were slaughtered, killed with Greek fire, just a bunch of stuff. All mining operations were henceforth stopped by the Turkic forces. Sadly, however, this victory wouldn't last because the ship that came in to look for the Venetian fleet after 20 days had failed to find them. And so now the defenders knew that no one was coming to help them. Period. By the 24th of May, both sides actually had really poor morale. Byzantines, they knew that no one was coming to help them. The Turks, they were running out of supplies rapidly. This is basically 2 months of siege. You're wasting supplies. Tons and tons of beef and chicken and ammo are being wasted here. And on top of that, the cannons are a lot to maintain. And on top of that too, we've got ourselves the threat of the Hungarians coming in. So it's not good for them. The Sultan Mehmet himself is surrender, convert, or die. Your choice. Right now, Sultan Mehmet's patience has been wearing thin. There's an eclipse that happens above the city that's oh, fuck, what the fuck? Why is God hating us now? And both sides are just not in a good time. Now, Sultan Mehmed on the 25th is basically going to ask his commanders if they could still continue the siege. And Halil Pasha is like, fuck no, we need to get the fuck out of here. It's not going well, guys. We need to just stop. And Zaganos Pasha is he knows Sultan Mehmed doesn't like him. Zaganos convinces the Sultan. The Sultan then asks hey, ask around the camp what we should do. Should we attack now or should we attack later? Should we get away? And everybody says we should attack now. We should just have a massive final assault. So now Mehmed agrees to that. Halil Pasha is shitting his pants, and Zaganos was correct. So now we are now attacking the city. Because of that, on the 25th and 26th, we see the heaviest bombardment of this entire period whatsoever. 27th, that bombardment is focused on the stockade at the Mesothecion. And in 3 shots, it blows up the entire fucking thing. Our boy, Giovanni, is struck by a splinter, but he's okay. He's fine. The Sultan would basically tell his troops, hey, you can pillage this city for 3 days straight after we're done taking it. And all these Bashi bazooks are thrilled by that. So the Turks, round the clock, through the night, are filling the fosse of this area, so to speak. They are filling it up, making sure that they can cross over it without issue. On Monday, the 28th, basically there was a huge rest period for the entire Turkish army. We're gonna all sleep, we're gonna chill out, we're gonna have some fun. Then finally, the final plans are made. So now Sultan Mehmed gives his final orders to his army. He tells his fleet to attack the chain and attack the walls across the Golden Horn, to attack the Black Herne, the Mesothecion, and the area between the gates of Pege and the Golden Gate here. So this whole area is being concentrated. And even if there's no way to gain an advantage on the walls and to scale them, you have to try and feign attacks. You have to make the defender believe that you are going to scale the walls. In that way, you prevent any incoming forces from defending the Mesothecion. By this point, the defenders of the Greeks have gone from like 4,000 to 2,000. And there's very little troops anymore around. During this final assault, Karaca Pasha will attack the gate of Charsius. Zagan Pasha's forces will attack the Black Herne. The Sultan Mehmed's forces with Halil Pasha and the Janissaries will attack the Mesothecion, and Ishak Pasha's forces will attack the 3rd military gate over here near the Gate of Spring. Now, like I said beforehand, bickering was intensifying hardcore during this period. So much so between the defenders that when the Venetians in the Venetian quarter were building fortifications to send forward to the defenders over here, those fortifications had to be carried by Greeks. The Greeks didn't want to carry the fortifications made by the Venetians because they weren't getting paid to do so, right, at fair wages that they needed to feed their families. And they didn't want to be ordered around by the Venetians, which caused so much animosity between Greeks, Venetians that were already building for Venetians and Genoese. And so these 3 groups of people, right, the emperor had basically mixed together Genoese, Venetians, and Greeks together into all their groups, right? They didn't allow all the Genoese to be in one area and all the Venetians to be in another. They're all mixed in to create a sort of camaraderie. But there was still bickering on all sides because of these different factors. The Greeks had families here, the Venetians didn't really, the Genoese had them in Pera. It's like crazy. Giovanni had asked Lucas Notaras here if he could take some cannons and bring them to the Mesothecion. Everybody knew the final assault was coming, they had seen the Turks prepare, so they needed to bring the cannons here now. And Lucas was being a little bit of a fucking pussy and not giving my cannons to my walled structure here. So there was a lot of friction even between the commanders. And Lucas had good reason to resist. He thought these cannons would have been useful in shooting the attackers from the Golden Horn that were trying to obviously scale the walls there, you know, just like they had done during the 4th Crusade. By Monday though, a lot of the defenders stopped quarreling and the emperor gave a big speech and everybody was just kind of spiritually preparing for the inevitable. Actually a beautiful moment where everybody gathered in the church, Greeks, Venetians, Genoese, everybody was praying, Catholics were praying with Orthodox, and for the first time, there was like a union with Rome basically. Greeks and Italians would all maintain the area behind the stockade and in front of the outer wall basically, as this was the final stage of the battle. Closing also the inner gates behind them as well to make sure that the Turks cannot get through. And even the emperor would go and inspect all these gates as well. We'll talk about why that's important later. It's here where the final assault begins. The Turks made their battle cries, The elderly and children went to the churches. The women went to send water and stone to the defenders, and the defenders were all ready to go, basically. Bashi bazooks came forward. They would be the first to attack. They were given basically, more or less, not a lot of arms, but what they were given were basically scaling ladders. So all of them had scaling ladders, and they tried to scale the stockade of the Misophikion, right? And so that was basically the first test of the defenders, fighting off against the Bashi bazooks. Military police were behind the Bashi bazooks, so if the Bashi bazooks ever fled these attacks, they would just be killed by the military police. And if they fled the military police, they would be shot by the Janissaries, which is so funny. It's like, oh my God, we just have these guys just attack and we don't pay them. It's so smart. Now the Bashi bazooks were attacking the entire line, and it was carnage, you know? Like one stone throw from up top the wall could just annihilate like a whole group of Bashi bazooks, right? Or disable them essentially. They can throw Greek fire on them, hot oil, you have culverins, you have like small cannons, you have arbalets, you have crossbows. It was a bad time to be a Bashi bazooka. And then you're like crowded in with a bunch of your other bros, like, yeah, you guys are dying. Giovanni was given all the muskets and guns of the city, so they were laying waste to them essentially, dying in droves. For 2 hours, the horde finally collapsed and they retreated backwards. Then after that came Ishak Pasha's Anatolian forces who came in. Now these guys were better armed, better trained, they were devoted Muslims, so they had better morale, but again, their numbers were too massive, they couldn't move through the Misophikion and the stockade and stuff, so they were just getting cut down as well. Urban's cannon would fire and create a giant hole in the stockade, allowing the Asiatic troops to funnel in through. So they basically funnel in through, and then the Turks, the Greeks surround them, and the Greeks managed to kill like, what, 300 of them? Yeah, 300 Anatolians were surrounded and slaughtered. So then the Anatolian troops were told to back off. 2 of the attacks had already failed for the attackers, so the defenders were doing pretty well. Hamza Bey attempted to do some attacks here around the Sea of Marmara, scale some walls here, and they were thwarted by Greek monks on the walls, so they can't even get through on this side. And of course, by the Turks under Prince Orkhan. So it's just, it's bad. Hamza Bey can't get anything done at this point. You'd see some attacks on the Golden Horn, but like I said beforehand, they were just feint attacks over here. So they were just like, oh, they would attack and then back off, attack and back off. Now there was fierce fighting in the Black Hernay front between the Bokciardi brothers actually, and they were able to fend off multiple attacks from Karaca Pasha actually, especially with their Venetian crossbowmen. While this was happening, the Janissaries finally made their move and attacked the Misophikion. And the Janissaries, like I said beforehand, are some of the elite troops of the Ottoman Empire. They are firing volley after volley of basically musket fire at the stockade, at the defenders of the Misophikion. Janissaries, unlike the Asiatic troops and the European troops, were basically walking in an orderly fashion, like attacking slowly and methodically, basically chipping away at the stockade. Once they got there, they attempted to hack it away. And it looked as though that the forces at the Misophikion were actually holding it down. The Janissaries were not making any progress, and it looked as though there was some hope actually in fending off the Janissary attack. Albeit the defenders were completely exhausted after fighting off the Bashi bazooks, the Asiatic troops, and now the Janissaries. Now, while this fighting is going down, this hand-to-hand combat with the Janissaries at the stockade, we then have the events at the Black Hernay. You see, the Bochardi brothers had basically pushed out Karaca Pasha's forces and used the Kerkoporta over here by this question mark to sally out and attack his forces and then, you know, obviously come back. But what the Turks had noticed was that the gate was left open after they did this sortie. And so because of that, 50 Turks managed to push through and get inside the gate. So now this was noticed by the European troops outside, who attempted to go back and close the Turks in. So while that was happening and while they were attempting to surround the Turks, Giovanni gets hit. He was shot by a culverin, and basically his breastplate is pierced. He's bleeding out. And he basically asked the emperor to leave the battlefield. The emperor's like, can you just stay? And the guy's like, no, I'm gonna die. So as Giovanni is leaving, being carried out by some of his men, the rest of his men are kind of getting confused. They're like, oh, do we all have to retreat? Do we all have to leave? And they start leaving. The emperor is trying to stop them and be like, hey guys, we need to stop. We need to keep fighting. Why are you leaving? Don't retreat. The Genoese are seeing this happen, right? And they start to get the idea to leave as well because they see the Venetians leaving, so they should leave. And then all of a sudden someone yells out, the Turks got through the walls. That is when, you know, they obviously got through the Cerco Porta. This confusion leads to the mass leaving of Genoese and Venetians from the Mesothecion, leaving the Greeks and Constantine at the mercy of the Janissaries. The Janissaries, led by a giant named Hassan, managed to breach through the stockade, hacking away at it and using their numbers to overwhelm the Turks. Then the Bashibazouks came in. Then the Western European forces. Then the Asiatics. Everybody was funneling in. Thousands and thousands of Turks were funneling in through the Mesothecion now. And the Greeks, who had basically built a hole or dug a hole behind them to fill up the stockade with, were basically being pushed into this hole, right? So this is a top-down view. We've got ourselves the Ottoman army, the defenders, and then we have the fortifications. The defenders are between the stockade over here, the inner wall, and the stockade used to be the outer wall, but it's been completely destroyed because of cannon fire, okay? The moat over here has been filled up because before the final assault, the Ottomans had filled it up over the course of the night. Well, 2 nights beforehand, right? And then over here, behind the defenders, is a ditch, which they had basically dug up because they wanted to use all this earth to fill up the stockade. So now the stockade is filled with wood, earth, all that shit. And behind the ditch is the inner wall. First, we have the Bashibazouks. I lost my Bashibazouk symbol, so we're just going to use this horse archer. But do keep in mind that they weren't using horses, right? So just go with it, right? So Bashibazouks are going to come. They're going to go across the fosse, over the moat, and then they're going to try and scale the stockade with their ladders. So now the Bashibazouks, once they reach the stockade, are going to lay siege to it. They're going to do this for a few hours, but eventually over time, they're not going to make any headway. They're not going to be able to get past the defenders above the stockade, throwing down various projectiles at the Bashibazouks, and the Bashibazouks are going to retreat. After they retreat comes the Anatolian troops, who are more motivated, better armed, and they push in the same way. However, they too are also going to be stuck in this position, right? They're going to be stuck sieging the stockade until the Great Bombard fires a massive cannon shot. This cannon shot virtually wipes out the entire stockade area here. The Anatolians move in mass to try and get at this hole, right? To try and swarm it. As you can see, the defenders allow the attackers to move in through this hole that has been opened up from destroying the stockade, and they let them funnel in. They're crammed, they can't move anywhere, they can't maneuver, and these 300 Anatolian troops that move into this opening are basically slaughtered by the Christians. After several hours of fighting, the Anatolian troops push back, and the defenders are about to catch their break. They're exhausted after hours of fighting. They're about to repair the stockade when all of a sudden the Janissaries move in. Now the Janissaries are advancing in an orderly fashion, very calm and collected, and attacking the stockade and slowly reaching it and manage to hack away at it. The defenders will rush up to meet them. So now the defenders are going to attempt to kill them in hand-to-hand combat before the Janissaries can actually make a dent in the stockade. While that happens, Giovanni Gustani gets hit by a cannonball, or he's pierced in the breastplate by a projectile, an arrow, something like that. I pretty much forgot. And so because of that, he asked Constantine if he could escape. And Constantine begrudgingly allows him to. And he escapes through one of the gates here. Now, once Giovanni makes his way to escaping, a lot of his Venetian men will follow along with him. And some of the Venetians there will also see them leave and then also make their move. And now the Genoese, noticing the Venetians are gone, will also make their move and try to leave. So that means that now there's only Greeks on the field. This comes at a critical junction where Hassan is moving in, sacrifices his life to make an opening for the Turks, right? He dies, but the Turks are able to basically cut away at this stockade, especially because of the lack of defenders here. So now the Turks are moving in mass, expanding out. We're seeing hundreds, if not thousands of Turks flood in here. And they start to overwhelm the defenders and push them back. And now the Turks, thousands of them, flood in basically. All of them, Bashi bazooks, Anatolian troops, the works, basically flood in. They push the defenders into the ditch and they are slaughtering them. The defenders have no way out. All the gates are locked, aside from the gate that the Venetians and Giovanni escaped through, that the Genoese followed them through. So now they're trampling over each other and they're getting stuck in the gate. Now these Greeks over here are being slaughtered in the ditch. And basically, at this point, it is over. There's not enough troops manning any of the other areas. They were all sent to the Mesothecion mostly to defend this point. And so now the battle is basically over and done with. That's the top-down view, so to speak. Also, let me know if my microphone has been shit lately in this video. I've been experimenting with it multiple times. And especially the lighting, too. I feel like I got it down for this part of the video, but kind of fucked up. He was joined by his Spaniard cousin, Don Francisco of Toledo. Theophilus would also join him, and also John Dalmata. All of these guys would join Constantine in trying to help out the Lycus Valley situation. But once he got there, it was fucked. It was beyond fucked. The troops had tried to go through the same gate that Giovanni left through, right? And because that gate was the only one that was open to move troops in, the troops were getting stuck inside themselves, you know, basically glitching in themselves and stuff, being stuck in the fucking entranceway. And so they weren't able to go through properly, and the Turks were able to cut them down, or they were trampling over each other, creating huge piles of corpses. Constantine and friends are just over here watching the chaos. He eventually, from the looks of it, someone sees him like getting stabbed in the crowd, or Constantine throwing away his imperial regalia. He joins the horde in the fight, and he's never seen again. It's over. So yeah, we don't know what happened, right? It's eyewitnesses say he was attacked. Eyewitnesses say that he moved in after his cousin moved in first into the horde. Tursun Bey says that apparently Turkish soldiers had cornered him, killed him, and decapitated him, and that's how the emperor died. But I mean, I don't believe that, because then like they would have brought the head to Sultan Mehmed, you know. So it is complete destruction. The Turks are able to move in and plant flags above the walls, essentially taking over the inner and outer wall and scaling across the area, so to speak. Basically, they move in, they open up a gate, and then they open up the other gates for the other Turks. So now they are just streaming through the gates, so to speak, and into the city. Bochardi brothers, they're going to try and help out and alleviate the situation. They realize it's fucked, and the Bochardi brothers, along with the Venetians, they try to escape. One of the Bochardi brothers, that being, of course, what's his name? Paolo, he was killed. Whereas Antonio and Trollio managed to escape along with the Genosians, the Genoese, over to their ships over here in the fleet of the besieged. So now the Genoese and the Venetians, they're now getting the fuck out of the situation. And anybody else who is trying to escape is going to try and swim out to join the fleet of the besieged. And the chain now is being lifted away from the city, and the fleet is going to try and escape and make a break for it. Actually, Girolamo Menotti and his Venetians are basically surrounded and killed, so they're annihilated over here at Baccarne. Out of the fleet of the besieged, especially Giovanna's forces, they're going to escape and leave the city, right? Some of them, though, will be captured by the Turks, however, and so it's some escape, a lot of them don't. And so now the complete control of the city is maintained. Now, the final defenders of the Fall of Constantinople will be, of course, Cardinal Isidro. Cardinal Isidro will disguise himself and escape the city, so he's going to be fine. The Turks of Orkhan and the Catalan troops, however, are going to be the final defenders. The Catalan troops are just going to take out as many motherfuckers as possible. The Turks of Prince Orkhan, they know they're fucked, so they're just going to fight it out as much as possible. I believe Prince Orkhan tries to disguise himself. Someone recognizes him and he's just executed on the spot. Sultan Mehmed will wait until the city is done pillaging, and then he will move in to the gate of Carcissus. And that basically begins a period of time in which Constantinople is looted and raided. Citizens are harassed, women are stolen, people are killed on the streets essentially, churches are defaced. Some of them aren't defaced, actually. It depends. It seems like as the Turkish forces are moving into Constantinople, because of how isolated each district was, every district had like a different idea or interpretation of what was happening in the siege. So some districts surrendered earlier than others, and that avoided them from being attacked from Turkish forces. And some of them continued to hold out, which meant that they would be very, very persecuted and highly focused in the pillaging efforts. A lot of lives were spared, but about 50,000 people were captured. A lot of women, men, some children. The only people that weren't captured were babies and elderly, because they were seen as like a waste, essentially. Funny enough, only 500 soldiers. So of the 8K troops that defended Constantinople, only 500 are left. So after all this pillaging and murder, Prince Mehmed moves into the city proper, ends the pillaging and murder. He basically tells all the Greeks to go back home. He even helps out some of the aristocracy get back on their feet. He more or less restores order to the city. He would also split up the plunder between all of his men. So a lot of the men got their own fair share. Mr. Giovanni, however, will die, unfortunately. So he will die over the course of his injuries sustained in the conflict. Constantine is dead. The Byzantine Empire is no more. So that's basically done and over with. Greeks were the main losers in this conflict. A lot of them were captured. A lot of them were killed. Some aristocracy, like Lucas Notaras, were harassed by Sultan Mehmed. He basically was like, hey, Lucas, I heard you had a sexy son. Bro was like 14. Sultan Mehmed was like 21. He was like, let me have him. And then Lucas is like, no, I'm not going to let you like rape my son. What the fuck? And then Sultan Mehmed, he forces the issue, and Lucas still denies it. And then he kills, Sultan Mehmed kills Lucas's both sons. And then Lucas just like is like, yo, just kill me, please. And Mehmed sort of is like, oh no, I went too far. It was just a meme. But really, Mehmed was just trying to get rid of the old aristocracy of the Byzantines. The Greeks would form what we know as a millet system right here. A millet was basically a self-governing body, right, that would appoint a religious figure. This religious figure would be in charge of an ethnic group. So that being, of course, Greeks, Armenians, you know, maybe like if there was like Hindus, there'd be a Hindu millet basically and stuff like that. There'd be a millet for all the different ethnicities of the Ottoman Empire. And they had like their own, they would have their own self-governing laws. Scene of Sultan Mehmed basically going through the gate of Carcissus and just like seeing the scores of Byzantines dead along with his Turkic bodyguard and stuff. But you see that Mehmed now owns the city, and he starts repairing it, and he starts also having the idea of making this the capital of his new Ottoman Empire. And by 1481, the city essentially rebounds, right? There's now Turks, there's Anatolians of different kinds, there's Jews, there's Christians, there's Greeks, there's Armenians, all living in the city. Now, just doing quick maths, the population of Constantinople was about 50K, maybe 30K ultimately, and increased fourfold to maybe 250,000. I'm not really sure what fourfold means, honestly. If anybody could tell me in the comments, that'd be good. But the important thing is by basically a century later, it increased to 500,000. So there were 500,000 people living in Constantinople a century after Mehmed's conquest. They had basically brought it from the brink of non-existence all the way to becoming an imperial city once again. It was reborn as Istanbul. Now, from their victory at Constantinople, the Ottomans are going to go crazy, and the Ottoman Empire is going to expand on all three directions, conquering in Africa, Asia, and Europe. June 9th of 1453 is where everybody starts to realize that like Constantinople has fallen as the Cretan soldiers and sailors are returning back to Europe. The Romans the Pope actually, with the Venetians, like I said earlier, had agreed to send some ships and 400 troops to help in the defense of Constantinople. And they were just waiting off the coast of some place known as Chios to get that done, right? So it's like C-H-O, yeah, right there, Chios. The galleys were all there waiting. And once the Venetian refugees came, they told these galleys that, hey, the city was already fallen. And so at that point, the galleys from Chios that were sent to go defend Constantinople, they just went back to Venice. Now, Genoa and Venice will try and cocksuck the Ottomans into making sure that the Ottomans don't attack them in their colonies, since they low-key kind of helped Constantinople. Vizier Halil Pasha will be executed after this. Ishak Pasha will avoid the pruning of Sultan Mehmed's administration, him getting rid of his father's ministers and stuff, just like Halil Pasha. Ishak Pasha will survive and be promoted. Zaganos Pasha, I believe, will... Yeah, what will he do? He will become chief vizier. Yes, there we go. Constantinople was definitely going to fall. Even if they succeeded, they would have fallen like decades later. Constantinople will have to give up more rights to Western alliances, basically, being a cocksucker to Genoese and Venetian troops. Not a good idea. They would have had to combine their religion with the Pope to even get assistance from him. So they would ostracize their Orthodox brothers in Russia and Armenia and Serbia. But May 29 was definitely a turning point in world history. May 29, 1453 was the end of the Byzantine era. Here we see the end of ancient Greek and classical Greek learning, and instead these structures and this influence and this technology and this culture will be consumed by a much larger culture, a much more imperial culture that will take over and show off its own imperial might, its own technologies, its own classical learning. That being, of course, the Ottomans, who will now call this city Istanbul. Thank you to my patrons for making this video possible. If you head over to Patreon right now, you can get your look at my thoughts on all the sources, including primary and secondary, that I used in this video, as the video was taking way too long to finish. And also you can get your name up on the board here. Thank you to specifically X Sono HX, Desi Boo 189, Frank Udajin, Alexander Smoker, Alexander Turpin, Khan, Emma Marco, Modesty Liquid GI, Varun Pandey, Hispanic Memes, Yeti, Thomas O'Leary, Christian Zug, Samatir, Khan of Han, Reformatter, Chris B, Roof Han, Samuel Ojeda Lopez, Stefan Summoner, Cody DeBra, Albert Lee, Comrade, Albert Lee again, I forgot, Magnus, Comrade, Orlando Riveria, TH, and Electric Messiah. Thank you, and have a good day.